Welcome to Speaking Influence. And if you have been following the show recently, you'll know that this week we've been celebrating 100 episodes and over 5,000 downloads. It's an exciting time for the show. And I'm personally looking forward to the next 100 episodes and the next 5,000 downloads and beyond as we look to the future. And no doubt, in my mind, that I have some of the most amazing guests coming up on the show. And one of them is here with me today. And so recently we spoke with a professor of rhetoric. Today we're speaking with a professor of communication. And he is also the host of the podcast Communicate to Motivate. He is the leader of the Energy Bus for Schools program, part of the John Gordon programs, the John Gordon School of Public Speaking. So please welcome to the show today, Jim Van Allan.
Hey, nice to be here. Good to be with you all. Congrats again on 100. I know it's a big milestone, so glad to be
It
part
was
of your
for me.
success. Yeah, it is.
I
I
was
hear you.
thinking earlier that hopefully there's going to come a point of the show where I'm looking back and thinking, oh yeah, that was nothing. That was just 100 episodes. That was just 5,000 downloads. I hope I get to that point with it. But right now it's a big thing. Yeah,
For sure. Congrats
absolutely.
again. Uh-huh.
I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to speaking with you, Jim. We had a chat a little while back, and I know that one of the things that a lot of people who tune into this show really want to talk about and hear about is communication, especially from the stage, and leadership from platforms as well. And you have some specialism in this. In fact, you are not just a great speaker and trainer, but you are someone who can really speak to leadership from the platform. Before we get into that, there is something that I want to ask you. What is one thing that you just can't live without
Are you talking about in general, opposite
in
communication?
general?
In general? All right, let's see. One thing I can't live without. I'm gonna have to go with the gym. I'm gonna be honest with you. The working out has been in my blood for since I was 16, so it's been almost 20 years or so, and it's sort of my escape, my getaway. I get to put my earphones in. I get to find some balance. I get to exercise and feel good. It wakes me up. It gets me going. Makes me happy. So that's definitely one thing that came to mind, which was tough when they were closed for a few months during the pandemic. I tell you what, as soon as they opened back up in Florida, which of course everything opened back up very early in Florida, I probably did a 180, peel into that parking lot and getting my workout in the morning. So that's important to me, and it's a priority in my life for sure.
Now, I like going to the gym. I wish I had the same kind of passion for it that you do. I have to keep working on that and hope that someday that I can get there. Yeah, I love that. It's great. I do always feel energized when I go. And there are other things that give me that. Right now, I've got a big passion for kayaking. I've rediscovered kayaking recently and fallen back in love with it. And so that's something I want to spend as much time as I can doing these days. It's, maybe that'll get to a point where I can't live without it as well.
I like kayaking as well because you're seated, and I sort of have like this, fear a little bit of open water. So, like my wife and I were kayaking I'm sorry, we were paddleboarding in Hawaii a few weeks ago, and I kept falling in the water like over and over again, and I would scurry up like a scared animal because I just didn't want to be bobbing in the water alone there, and on a paddleboard, the waves are coming and knocking you over. But when you're on a kayak, it's like, all right, we went kayaking as well, and I felt confident and safe and still able to get good exercise in. I think most of all, I stayed in the boat, and I didn't have to be bobbing in the water. So I'm with you there for sure.
Yeah, I was having this idea, this inspiration for doing coaching in a kayak. I wonder if anyone already does that, but I think, oh, that'd be so cool. It's so peaceful. And if you're in a two-person thing, there's a lot of lessons in kayaking that you could apply into coaching and things as well. So I
Like putting a
wonder if
camera
that's
out there doing like live coaching or so, like a GoPro recording you, or as you're
I
coaching with
guess that's
somebody.
a possibility as well. I was thinking like doing a two-person kayak thing and having like
Oh,
one
that
person
way.
in the
Oh, yeah.
front and one person in the back and doing the coaching whilst you're kayaking and like swapping over positions and stuff and learning different things from that, maybe.
Well, and that way you're not, I don't know if like from a communication perspective, you're not like looking straight at each other, like you're sitting at a table staring at each other. And sometimes I've had the best conversations when I'm like walking with somebody, where you're walking straight ahead, you're not having to look at each other all the time. So I feel like I don't know, this allows you to be a bit more honest, or just, I don't know, there's a different dynamic to it when it's not as formal. and you have to communicate out there, right? You're just two guys, two dudes kayaking. So kind of, it's
Yeah.
like, all right, let's make the most of this, and you have to talk
I
anyways.
like this idea of you're kind of doing an activity that doesn't use up a huge amount of brain energy, so
Right.
you can pretty much keep paddling whilst you're thinking and doing stuff. So you've got something that's also taking some attention and leaves you enough space to be able to think. And yeah, I think the setup could be quite good for that. So if anyone out there is doing kayak coaching already, I want to hear from you. How's it going? How does it work for you? I'm thinking
I
about
would
doing
love
it
to
myself.
see you on social media advertising your kayak coaching. I think that would be a lot of fun to see.
I think it could
Pioneer.
happen, Jim. So I want to get into that. That was fun, and thank you for that. I want to get into now talking about communication. And first of all, tell us a bit more about what exactly it takes to become a professor even of communication, and why did you want to become a professor in communication?
For sure. So, since I was young, like high school, I always knew that I wanted to get into teaching on some level, and I knew it was going to be in the collegiate ranks. I didn't want to deal with the behavior stuff of high school and middle school in the U.S. So, I always had my eyes set sort of on teaching collegiately. And it wasn't until I sort of got into college where I discovered, all these communication courses you could take as an undergrad. And there's a minor at my school, so University of Florida. There's a communications minor, and they didn't have a major for it. Obviously, or I would have done that. And the minor, there was like you only needed 15 hours, which is only no, 18 hours, which is only 5 or 6 classes to get the minor. Like it wasn't gigantic, and I think I tripled up on it. Like I think I had close to like a third of my credits that were all like I took every communication class there was. I TA'd for some of those classes, and just fell in love. Right, I just found it to be so interesting and real and relevant. I was able to use the things from my undergrad classes in my friends circles with people I was interacting with, and I was already a raw but pretty good public speaker at the time, and I was able to use some of the skills I was learning in class and write in speech making and things like that. So I just fell in love with it because I saw how real it was. I was tired as a student of taking classes and not math or some other things, and just not seeing the why do I take this type thing. And then when I took communication classes, I'm like, okay, I see value here. I see the real life application, and I know I can teach that in the future and have fun with it as well. So I had fun as an undergrad, and now as an instructor, I try to have a lot of fun with my students too. Especially if I happen to be on campus. I teach a lot online now, but I still try to make it interesting and fun and relevant, just like when I was an undergrad taking those classes.
Yeah, I wish that kind of subject had been available in my university. Sadly, it wasn't. I think I would have fallen in love with speaking and communication a lot sooner in my life had it been. But it is what it is, and I discovered those things a bit later on,
Right,
thankfully.
right.
So I'm not sad that I discovered it. I just, always wish it could have been earlier. But who knows?
Sure, of course. But you found it, and just like calm's all around you, so you're gonna find it eventually. So of course. And
Absolutely. So your path to that seemed like that was a great fit for you. And what path has that set you on for your life from there?
well, from there, so there's the passion to teach it, but then there's that passion to live it, right? And to do it on stage and to kind of perform it. There's the academic piece, and then there's the performance piece, and that performance piece was always the strongest inside of me, and I just didn't know how to get there. Right? How do you become a professional speaker? Like, there's not a major for it. I looked, trust me, I looked, I asked around. There's not, and so I had to sort of create that own path. All through growing up, I'd go to these conferences as a student, and I'd look at the stage, and there'd be the keynote speaker, right, who would come to do the conference, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, make you laugh, tell stories. And I was sitting in the audience doing public speaking competition for that organization, and as a student, and seeing the keynote speaker on stage and saying, I want to do that. How can I do that? That would be fun. So it was that love for communication in college and all the courses I took to make me say, all right, you need to figure out a way of making this a career for you. Because I always wanted to do something that I really enjoyed and liked, obviously. And I knew deep down I probably wasn't your typical 9 to 5 guy. It just that was, I could do it if I needed to, but man, I love living outside those parameters.
Right.
So I made my own path, and I always knew I wanted to be a speaker. And some friends of mine had seen an author speaking in '06. His name is John Gordon. Back then, nobody knew who he was, right? Right now, he's a top 5 speaker in the United States. And they said, Jim, we just saw this guy speak. We know you want to be a speaker. You should reach out. He was only an hour and a half from my university living. So I emailed him one night, and I just said I would love to be a speaker. I'm a junior at the University of Florida. Anything you could do to help would be awesome. Not thinking I'd get any response in the world, he wrote back that night, gave me his cell phone number, and said, "Let's talk." And that was what, 16 years later, and we're still talking. I just talked to him yesterday.
Right.
Like, where it's our relationship has now grown professionally, where I'm running a division for him and speaking all over the country the last 10, 12 years. But it started with one email. It started with that initial love for communication to make me say, as any kid asks, what can I do with this in my life? How can this,
Yeah.
what am I going to do with my life? And I sort of always knew. I just had to kind of look for the doors that would get me there.
Mm. You are perhaps speaking to and interacting with and some of the toughest crowds to do that with, where you really have to sometimes work extra hard to have their attention and to keep them engaged with what you're talking about and interested in what you're saying. So I suspect you've picked up some great skills and tricks along the way. What do you think is the key to keeping audiences of young people engaged and a part of interacting with what you're doing?
It's a great question, and I think any successful public speaker and communicator will tell you that the game is won or lost in the preparation stage. Right? I know how it's going to go based on doing my research beforehand. So I do talk to a lot of student groups, but I also talk mainly to teacher administrator groups at schools. That's probably, right now, 80-90% of my clientele are teachers, staff, school people. And that can be a tough crowd. You know why? Because schools have a lot of money for professional development. So they bring in speakers a lot of times every year. So you have a teacher sitting there. Most teachers that are in my audiences have been there between 10 and 30 years, right? At that school or in general. They've seen a lot of speakers.
Yeah.
They've been through a lot of professional development. They've pretty much seen it all at that point. And then I come up and it's like, is this guy just going to be just another name we're going to forget, another topic that we're going to get excited about at the beginning and then forget about? Or so I always come in and try to say, all right, I'm going to be different than anything you've ever seen. But I know it's going to start in the preparation phase. It's going to start where, I'm talking to whoever's bringing me in. And I always ask, tell me about your audience. Tell me about speakers you've had in the past. What are your goals coming into this school year? How does this group respond to interaction and engagement if I pull them up on stage? And I'm always taking the temperature of things before I get there. So I can craft the presentation around that group. Doesn't mean I need to, you know, reinvent the wheel every single time, but there's going to be certain elements that I know are going to work in certain parts of the country and certain
Right.
elements that are not going to work in other parts of the country. So I think that's the first step for sure, is preparation. That's made me very successful moving forward, and it's helped make me more confident as well.
What then are some of the things that you would perhaps change or make sure you do or don't do with audiences that may be a little resistant, perhaps even to not wanting to interact at all, or maybe even to having to sit and listen to another speaker?
Yeah, and I've had groups like that where, because sometimes I'll do the keynote address, right? Like I always wanted to do, where it's an hour, right? And it's a little bit more, and they're seated in an auditorium. Or I'll do a half day, 3-4 hours, or a full day, 6 to 8 hours. I've done everything and anything and everything time limit wise. And there are some groups that want to sit on their hands or want to not participate as much. And what I have to say is the mark of a good speaker, right, is being able to adapt on the fly. So I never come in with a script. I never come up with a script that I have to follow to a T. That's suicide in the speaking world. It's not going to work out too well for you. So I come with an outline. I generally know what we're going to talk about. I generally know the activities we're going to do. And, first thing I can do is I'll come in the room, right at the beginning, room, auditorium, wherever I am, and I just kind of do a lap. And I just sort of watch people, how they interact with each other. Are they on their phones? Are they laughing? What's the vibe in the room, right? I try to just drink in the vibe a little bit. If it's a little more sterile and quiet and, yeah, it's early, it's 8 o'clock, I know I'm going to have my work cut out for me. So then I know I have to really do a lot more interaction at the beginning to get them up and moving and talking and on stage and laughing, versus a group that's already sort of fired up. I can just kind of, I don't have to work as hard at the beginning to get them going. So
Right.
that's definitely something to keep in mind is, those groups is, I told you I can tell during the preparation phase. I can also tell walking around that room, coming into the school, wherever I'm going to be, just how much things I'm going to have to change. And just last week, like I had one student group at one school, and I did another student group 30 minutes away at a different school, and I completely changed my entire thing based on that first group. They were good, the first group, it required me. They were sitting in the stands. There was 15 of them, and I was asking questions and trying to make it into a conversation. But I could feel I was fishing a lot more, right? I was having to prompt them a lot more to get them to talk. Versus that
Mm.
second group, I'm like, I'm going to change things up, and we sat in a circle. Right, it was a smaller group, sat in a circle, and I had them interact a little bit more one on one, and then present more to me to the group, and it went much better, it just flowed much better. They interacted more, but so you kind of learn things like that as you go, and going on the fly has worked out well for me. And you only have about a half second to kind of decide what you're going to do. So that brain is firing pretty quickly. And that's kind of where the experience comes in of learning I need to shift gears and not be so tied to my notes. If you're tied to your
Yeah.
notes too much, you're kind of out on a limb sometimes.
If you don't have that experience yet, how could you start getting people to interact and turn up the energy?
So you talk about like once you've been booked, so to speak.
Yeah, for like, let's say someone's coming to speak somewhere and you're not sure, maybe it's not a great responsiveness crowd, or maybe you're doing that early morning thing. What do you recommend people do to get people warmed up and interactive and responding?
So I think a misconception some speakers and trainers have is they think it's maybe about them. They think it's more about, well, they came to hear me speak and hear my stories and just, sit there and be entertained by me. And there's some speakers who are great with that, right? And they're, upper echelon type speakers are really good, really good. Um, but I think what people forget though is like the audience really likes to be involved in the presentation. I mean, I've been doing this long enough, over a decade, where any audience I've been in, man, I've gotten them up, moving, talking, grooving, dancing, whatever it is,
Right.
to a certain extent. If I got a room full of bankers or lawyers, all right, we're going to tone it down a little bit, but I'm still going to get them talking. So I think I would tell somebody like that, don't be afraid to interact with them. Don't be afraid to, especially if if you have a fun group. Okay, like if I have teachers, I always say, all right, everybody. As soon as I come out there, I have an entrance song. I always have entrance music, whether I get introduced from the back, from the front row. I always have a song that's playing. It's upbeat, and I come out high energy and got my arms up and I'm clapping. I say, everybody get up, get up. I have everybody get up and rise out of their chairs. And some of them might groan and do it, but they'll do it, right? Because everybody's doing it, And if the speaker asks you, that's the power you have. They're gonna
Mhm.
they're gonna do what you ask them to do because that's just the nature of the relationship. And once they're up and they're clapping, or I have them stretch or move, move their arms this way or do something, or I'll I'll point out somebody in the front row, especially if it's a guy, be like, all right, let me see your best move, right? It'll be the assistant principal or something. And they love it. They're laughing, they're having fun with it. Now, I know I can get away with that with teachers in schools because they want to have fun. Other groups, I may be more, I may get them up, then I might sit them down and I might have them introduce each other. Or I might have them come up on stage and I do an activity where I bring people on stage and I have them hold power poses. So I'm sure your listeners know who Amy Cuddy is. She's a body
Mhm.
language expert, big time TED Talk person. She's incredible. She has people hold power poses for 5 seconds. When you do that, it can release a lot of endorphins and make people confident and smile. So I play Survivor's Eye of the Tiger. and I have five people up there, and I start the song over again with each person. It's got that, get the guitar riff at the beginning, and I have
Yeah.
each person show off their power pose for 5 seconds up there, right? And the crowd goes crazy and they go crazy. So no matter what group I'm doing, that's a good one because it gets people up, it gets them rooting for somebody. And then after that, I know the mood in the room is relaxed, right? Because there's always that initial dynamic when you're with an audience where they put up the walls at the beginning because they don't know you. They don't know you. They don't know if they can trust you, if they're going to have fun, if you're going to be wasting their time. So I always try to do interaction at the beginning to get them to like me, trust me, and just breathe a little bit, move around, breathe a little bit. They're a little more relaxed, and then boom, I take off into the meat of the material.
Mm.
So that's what I would say is don't be afraid to interact. Don't be afraid to have fun with them, laugh, joke, get them up moving. You know, depending on your audience, do your research, but most audiences will appreciate that,
Yeah,
depending on where you
absolutely.
are. Obviously, if it's a award speech or a
Yeah.
eulogy, okay, no. But if you're doing a training, people, your business training, those types of things, for sure they're gonna love it. They're gonna eat out of your hand afterwards.
Yeah. If it was my eulogy, I'd want people up and dancing, to be honest.
I want 80s played at my funeral, so I want it to be a happy time.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to get your perspective on how important you feel that the ability to get up and speak, either professionally or just in general, is in modern life, in the business world.
well, so the importance of that, the why behind that, the kind of the well, the think about like people who've risen to the top or people who have done well. All your listeners, you think about people who have ascended to leadership positions or who's the most respected in the company or wherever you find yourself, school, wherever you are. A lot of times, not every time, but most of the times, one of the qualities that person has is the ability to communicate effectively. And maybe, and that might be from a public speaking perspective, but I would hope that it's also from a conversational perspective as well. So, and I think they go hand in hand. Like I try to
Right.
make my talks, depending on where I am, a bit more conversational in nature, and I think that's helped me in the one-on-one conversational world, um, off the stage. So, in from a business perspective, how do you advance? How do you make yourself known and get messages out there? It's from communication and public speaking. And I would be, if you're listening out there, you got to be one of the first to, lead, say you want to be the team lead, say you want to do the presentation. Uh, the only way you're going to get better at public speaking is just doing it, like, and doing it in an environment that's not a controlled environment, like
Yeah.
my classes, right? My classes are a safe, controlled environment, but is nothing like a real live audience for you to cut your teeth. And maybe you don't have to present to the board of directors day one, but doing some team lead meetings every once in a while, or giving part of the presentation and just learning where to stand, how to use inflection, how to move around the room, how to work with a PowerPoint or work with a presentation or a prop, looking at people, asking questions. Like you kind of learn that way, but you're not going to learn by just being a follower on the team or
Right.
sitting at your desk or not trying to be part of the group. And because the people who will rise in a company, in a business, in a school, all that are going to be the ones who can effectively deliver a competent message. Uh, and then it's been like that since Greek and Roman days, right? Who had the
Yeah.
power back then? Like it was the orators, and they were just guys that could speak really well, right, and have great eloquence to it. There wasn't and they were the ones getting elected into leadership positions, or just dudes who could talk, right, and who attracted a crowd. And that not much has changed. If you
Yeah.
have the power of speech, you have power, and not a bad kind of power, Darth Vader power, but you have the power to influence, right? You have the power to persuade, and the power to, I think, most of all, impact people. And if people feel impacted by you, they're going to like you. They're going to be drawn to you. And in the business work setting, that means, opportunities, promotions. That means, more responsibility, and all these types of things that are going to help you do well.
Yeah. I think I've just lost my video feed, but can you still hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. I don't know what's
It's
happened
that
with
new
that, but
camera. It's that new camera you got, right?
it's that new camera. Yeah, I'm
Oh
going to have
no.
to get in touch with them. It was a Kickstarter thing, but
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's still
and
in beta, maybe.
it might still be in beta.
I can hear
However,
you though.
so long as you can still hear me, we're all good,
Yes,
and
sir.
we'll just have to manage it. The audience gets to look at you instead of me, which is
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm glad I
probably
shaved
better,
today.
probably better for them.
Oh, you're
So,
fine.
so sorry, that has completely thrown me now. But yeah, so I wanted to move on from that to uh, really what you think it takes to be able to influence well, like in terms of being a good communicator. You talked about preparation being important for your public speaking, and I guess that's probably a good skill to have in communication in general, being as prepared as you can be. But what makes somebody a good communicator?
So that's a good question. And I would probably start out with, I would probably say two things for sure. One, I think people want to see that you are genuine and you are real. I got off the stage 2 weeks ago from a keynote in Dallas, Texas. 100 teachers in the room, something like that. One of the best I've ever done. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it was just they were laughing, they were interacting. We just it's one of those crowds you just click with. There's certain crowd you click really well with. And I had a lady come up to me afterwards and she said, and nobody's ever said this to me, but she just said, you know what? You seem very real. She goes to me. She says, you seem very genuine. And I said, thank you. I try, right? I said, what you see is what you get. I said, it's true. And she just smiled. And I think that really, that meant a lot to me because I think I work really hard when I'm up there to be myself, but to be a more, I want to say a more enhanced version of myself, but it's still myself up there. And I do come across as genuine and real because I'm telling stories that are personal to me. I'm joking with the audience. I'm making them laugh. I'm being silly. Like in that particular audience, I walked out into the crowd and I was talking about who's my athlete in here, right? And somebody had a basketball, and I grabbed the basketball. I said, "Come with me," and I didn't plan any of this. And I said, "Let's have a spin contest where you spin the ball on your finger, right? See how long you could do it." And of course, he won because he played
Yeah,
basketball. But they could, and I even said, I'm like, hey, I'm going off script here. Like, and I just sort of joked with them. And it was just, it was a very real moment and it was fun. It got me laughing, got me off the stage and into the crowd. So I think if you're out there listening, you know, you don't want to force it. If there's a joke, if there's an activity that just feels too forced or you're pandering too much to the audience, you're not going to come across as real. You're not going to come across as genuine, and the audience is going to sniff that out pretty quickly. And I think the other thing that I would say is value, right? So you be real, you be genuine, but you also need to provide value. So you have to pull the right levers with each group. That's where the preparation phase comes into play. I know this month, like when I'm doing speaking to all my schools in the US, we're just starting to go back to school right over here. And there's a lot of angst with COVID and masking or not, and this or that.
hmm
There's a lot of that going on here, and the teachers are feeling the brunt of it. So I know when I'm talking to this group, I need to be focused on really encouraging them and talking about a positive culture and talking about mindset and focusing on that part of the material a lot because I know that's what's on the forefront of their brain. They're tired, right? They're tired of the negativity around them and they want something different. They want a new, different mindset. So I need to be able to provide value to them. So they're listening to me saying, that makes sense. I can try that. Yes, I like that. Instead of sitting there saying, what does this have to do with me? This is just a canned presentation. So it's knowing what levers to kind of pull with each audience is going to help you, the message to get through, you to have really good influence. And at the same time, you mix that with being a genuine and real person up there. And it's a nice combination for sure.
yeah. One interesting chat I had a while back was with a philosopher called Donald Robertson, who's an expert in Stoic philosophy and has several books on the subject. Very interesting guy. And at the time, I wasn't sure how I knew I wanted to speak to him, but I wasn't sure how I was going to relate stoicism to to a
Right.
podcast about public speaking and presentation skills and influence and persuasion and all those kinds of things. And then I read a book that he had published, which is called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. And in there, he was talking about how Marcus Aurelius, when he was in his education, he was being groomed for leadership. And part of the education in those times, we've already mentioned the sort of ancient Greece and ancient Rome as being some of the homes of all of this. And there were the sophists and there were the orators. And the sophists were the people who had all the flourishes, right? And all the great speaking skills, and the entertainers, really. They were these
Right.
slick entertainers. And then there were the orators who had the more passion, heart-led messaging, the people who actually wanted to change and create transformation. And he had to choose which side essentially he was going to come down on as to who was going to train him. And he went with the orators. He didn't feel that there was any value to speaking from a stage if you weren't transforming people,
Yeah.
creating transformation for people. And to me, that parallels with exactly how the world is today. That you can be a speaker who is out there entertaining, or you can be someone who is transforming people's lives. Hopefully, now we can be a blend of those two things because we want to entertain and engage, not just be all sincere, heartfelt messages. But I'm just curious to what you might think about that, what thoughts you might have in that area.
Well, I would say he chose wisely, right? He chose wisely
Yeah.
at that time for sure. And that was those are kind of the predominant schools of thought back then. And I love the correlation to today's world and all that's going on and certain voids in leadership. I mean, I just got done talking to my student groups recently, and I'm like, give me a few leaders that you all admire nowadays, and they really couldn't. They were like
Right.
they didn't really know what to say. Like they didn't really have a lot of answers, and I had to just sort of pivot from that conversation, which was a little bit eye opening to me. And luckily, they didn't say any celebrities, so to speak. But
Mhm.
there's something to be said about a somebody. I love people who are on the grassroots level, trying to do change from like going door to door and getting people to registering them to vote and holding meetings on how people can run for office and trying to influence that way. And I've been paying more attention to local politics lately in my own community and school board, more so than I ever have my entire life. It was always, well, who's my senator, who's my president, who's this. But in reality, the more the impact is coming from the local level. And I think more people need to start getting interested in local things, their own neighborhood, their own schools, their own community, and getting involved there, because that's where you're going to have the most impact on the people around you, so to speak. Where you do have to be real, you do have to be genuine. You don't have as many opportunities to do formal speeches. There's not as much grandstanding that needs to happen, like maybe on the macro level from a geopolitical type atmosphere. So yeah, there's something to say for that. You definitely have to be a bit of a people person to some extent to do that, but there's value there in in those one-on-one, those small group type relationships that you have on the local level.
Yeah. What do you think are the ways to transformation through communication? What are some of the key elements that really start to change minds?
Well, I would say, transformation through communication, keys to changing minds. I would say, from that standpoint, um, what I found is when you personal with people with stories and things like that, that's when it becomes really powerful. So, I always talk to my students when we're teaching persuasion. I always like to say, listen, like, we want to hear your facts, we want to hear statistics, and of course, we want to hear from where they come, like journals and things like that. But I also want to hear about how this topic impacts you. I said, you're gonna persuade me by a combination of all of everything. Your credibility, the content, the numbers, but also your stories. And I would say to start changing minds, from a hearing how something has impacted somebody and how when they had a thought shift on something, this happened, when I hear how that impacted somebody, that really makes me want to change my mind a little bit about things. And I think that's really important. I mean, I was there was a time where I kind of drew a hard line in the sand on medical marijuana, right, and CBD and all these types of things to do. And then I had a friend of mine talk to me about how he's used these things to help him get healthy from Crohn's and all these things, and how it's really worked, and told me a personal story about it. And it really changed my perspective quite a bit, where I never no longer had that hard line in the sand, where I was more open to the idea, where I was more interested in it, where I was more curious. And because I had somebody be tell me a personal story, right? They didn't drop a ton of numbers or statistics on me. It was more, here's how it impacted me, here's how it worked with me. And then you start hearing more and more stories out there on these different subjects. And that's when I think you see true transformation, is when you hear that firsthand account from somebody, how they've had a thought change, or a mindset shift, or this or that. And it makes you, end up potentially changing your positions a little bit, especially when it's
Yeah.
friends and family that are near you too.
Yeah, it's like cold hard data doesn't do a lot to change people's emotions and feelings about things, and ultimately it's our emotions that drive our decision making. And for something like changing our mind, we mostly need an emotional reason, although I think there are some sort of data elements and some other factors involved as well. But yeah,
It's a
undoubtedly,
combination, right? It's a
yeah,
combination. And here's the thing with data. Like, I'm all for data. Like, I always want students and people to support yourself. Where did you get that info? But at the same time, data, no matter what, and we've learned this in the COVID world, no matter what data is presented, there's always going to be somebody saying, well, I don't trust those numbers, or what was your sample size, or there's always a way to poke holes in that if that's your main argument. But when it's an emotional tie, when it's a story, when it's a personal account, it's harder to do that, especially when you have multiple accounts and multiple stories about things. So, from an individual standpoint, I think you have to realize, yeah, emotions are powerful, and that should be the driving force, but not the only thing, right? That's why it's got to be a combination of the data and the research with the emotional, with the stories. If it's just one or the other, you'll alienate your audience a little bit, alienate yourself from them. When you have a
yeah.
nice combination of the two, you're unstoppable as a persuasive speaker, because that's ethos, pathos, logos right there.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Three pillars of persuasion, right? And I all know
Indeed.
this. It's what I teach, and that's what I live by. It's a combination of the three, and
Yeah.
it really is that clear cut and dry.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a show that's called Communicate to Motivate.
I do.
So I wonder for you, well, first of all, why is that important? Why do you want to motivate, and why do you want to communicate? What are you hoping to motivate people towards?
Well, like I said, like, I always had an interest in communication because I found that it was really practical. Like, the communication courses I was taking in college and teaching, interpersonal communication, right? Teaching you how to have better relationships, nonverbal communication, like listening. I was taking all these classes. I took a class called family communication. I took a class called small group communication. I mean, I took them all. So I always loved the practical nature of communication, because I saw how much it impacted my life and how it helped me. So, when it came from a podcast perspective, I always knew, I was sort of fighting the idea of doing a communication only podcast, because I'm like, well, maybe I can be a little more, I didn't want to be that niche in communication. But then you realize, so wait a second, there's nothing niche about communication. Communication is so broad, like
Mm,
so broad. And I said, all right, you know what? I'm going to stick with what I know, and my bread and butter, what I've always had an interest with. But I'm going to take it and help people to realize just how much, when they start focusing on their communication skills, like all those things I just got done talking about, family, relationships, nonverbal listening, public speaking, all these things, when they focus on that, it can motivate them to be a better husband, to be a better employee, a better wife, a better whoever. It can really motivate you to want to get better in those areas, because now you have the skills and the tools to do so. you can't grow, you can't build unless you have the tools, right? You have the foundation in place. Without that, it's going to be, it's going to be an uphill battle that you're probably not going to win. So I always looked at my podcast as being able to make communication practical to people, give them tips and takeaways at the end that they can try that week, report back to me, tell some personal stories from my end, and bring on an occasional guest or two as well to kind of supplement these things. But I really wanted it to just be a personal account for people to use communication skills to motivate them, right, in all their areas of life. So
Yeah.
that's important for me to people be. I think it's an easy solution, right? If people are they have better communication skills, imagine the kind of world we can create, countries we can create if people just know how to do it much better. And one of the first things they'll learn is that it's not about them, it's about the audience, it's about other people. And I think that can help people if they take that mindset now. That's going to really help them be just more civil citizens in their societies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that first got me into listening to podcasts was that I already had like a passion, drive to listen to audiobooks. So I was already very much getting into this audio content. And I see more and more people coming into listening to podcasts now. Like the listener numbers are growing. So are the amount of podcasts, and more people get into it, especially during the pandemic. I think there's a lot of podcasts started,
Right.
but there's a lot of podcasts out there, not nearly as saturated as perhaps things like blogging or YouTubing. But as a communicator, what made you perhaps choose podcasting rather than a YouTube channel where you might have the more visual, or do you have maybe a mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's an area I have not explored. I think it's mainly because I need to, I don't think I even considered it at the beginning, to be honest with you. I always feel like I do better sometimes when I don't have the camera on. Sometimes, when I'm recording, when I'm doing my podcast, a lot of times I'm not even looking at the screen. Sometimes I'll be standing or I'll twirl in my chair as I'm recording, or where it's a bit more casual. And I think I like the podcasting too because I enjoyed listening to them before when I was walking or like when I'm working out. I don't listen to music. I listen to podcasts. And I just love hearing people talk and tell stories and interact and have a conversation. Like I'm a fly on the wall, like kind of we talked about. But all
Yeah,
I have is old school. I just have voice. Like they did in the 40s, 50s, 60s. They'd all get around the radio, right? And listen to the shows. And I know they didn't have the visual back then, but there's something about that callback to you just have the voice and you kind of have to use your brain to kind of get to that, point of reaching them. But it's certainly something to look into when I'm, doing the podcast in the future. I think part of it is I tend to record at random hours, and I'm not always going live if I needed to. But I see the draw of that just because you add that visual component, and we are a much more visual society now. Everything is visual and stimuli and takeaway. So I totally get it. It's definitely an area I probably should be looking at moving forward here because I'm about, let's see, I started May 20. So what is that? June, July, August, 14, 15 months in and still going strong. And same thing with you.
great.
Sometimes there's been some times where it's like, do I want to do this? But then you look at your numbers and you're like, you know what? I am having influence and I'm still having fun. I just have to make sure it's a priority.
Yeah. I think perhaps the people who tune in for podcasts are somewhat more committed. I mean, generally, you're going to be listening to a podcast for a lot longer than you might watch most YouTube videos, which probably don't go on generally for 45 minutes an hour. So, surely some do, I mean, for sure. But most podcasts probably tend to be a bit longer than a lot of other content out there.
Sure.
And it's a long time. It's a long time to have someone's attention for and be able to communicate directly to people. And what I love about it is, again, I was talking about we talked about the kayaking right at the start, about being able to kind of do other things and still absorb information and have your not do something that's taking up too much brain capacity, but still learn. Still, so you can go to the gym, you can listen to podcasts,
Right.
you can head out in a kayak and listen to a podcast, you can
Right.
go walking or whatever, in the car or on your commute, whatever. You can listen to podcasts and keep learning and growing and experiencing new conversations, or people talking about stuff that you love and that you enjoy. There's a lot of potential there. I think it's a great format for that, and there are some aspects to which I feel it has an advantage over the visual format, because I mean, although we're live streaming with video, most people will come across this episode through the audio podcast only. And so they have to imagine what we look like during
Right.
the conversation, or they're going to have pictures in their head. Their imaginations are more free to roam, and I think that's one of the things I like with the podcasting format is not that it makes people work harder, but it doesn't do all the work for you.
Yeah, I like that. Like I said, it's a callback, right? Where you have to
Yeah.
you're still engaging their brain significantly, and we're of an active society, especially in the U.S., where people are walking and moving and doing stuff and commuting, right? And I think that's where the podcasts come into play for sure, and that's big reason why. Like if I have a solo episode, they're usually about 15 minutes, right? No longer than
Mm,
20, usually 17, 18 minutes. I found that's the nice sweet spot. If I have a guest like you do here, it's going to run longer, 30, 40 minutes or so. But if it's solo episode, I guess I just heard feedback from people. They like sort of the short nature of my shows because they can kind of listen to it on their drive around town or sitting on the train or going here or there and feel like they're still being fed, right? They're still getting some meat here. And I love podcasts too because there's a topic for anybody. Like just go look in the database of podcasts and man, you will find you name it and it is there, right? It
yeah.
is a club, like just like in college, there's a club for everything and any interest. Podcasting is the same way. And I think sometimes the more niche you get, I think even the better because you have more of a loyal rabbit audience for sure. But it's definitely, there's a lot of them out there and it's only growing from here.
Yeah, long may they continue. As far as we're concerned, right? We
Let's hope
love the
so, right?
podcast.
For
Let's hope so.
sure.
It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. And before we start to draw things to a close, I wonder what is the best way for people to come and find out more about you?
Sure. They can find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at Jim Van Allan, VANALLAN. And I'm always putting stuff out, especially in my Twitter account with professional development, and that's very active there. And Instagram. I'm not a giant social media guy, but I definitely do put some content out there. My website too, Jim Van Allan, ALLAN.com, and there's a lot of information on there about my work with author John Gordon, who's written The Energy Bus, The Power of Positive Leadership. John's, always all around the country now, written 25 books, and I've had the pleasure of working with him for all these years. So there's information on that site as well on booking and that type of information too. So for sure, I'm out there and would love to interact with anybody.
And of course, they can check you out on your podcast, Communicate to Motivate.
Communicate to Motivate can be found anywhere. You just have to search that in any podcast database there is, and that'll pop up. And there's usually a link on my website as well to some of the latest episodes. So if you
Great.
all like communication and the practical side of it, then one episode a week. Mondays they drop every single Monday, and we have a good time for sure.
Well, I certainly hope that my listeners would enjoy that kind of content. I'm sure they would. So,
Definitely.
as we come to the end, there are two things that I like to ask every single guest who comes on the show. One is for a book recommendation, a book or a resource that you'd recommend. It could be a book related to communication. It could just be something that's really impacted you in your life. And then we'll come to our closing question.
That's so I would say from a book perspective, I'm going to give you a book. It's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Duhigg, The Power of Habit. And it's all about why we do what we do in life and business. And it's all about, kind of breaking free of certain perhaps negative habits that we have or addictions that we have It's a really powerful book. If you see it on Amazon, it's got a nice yellow cover on it. But The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business is really, really good. It's only about 9 years old for sure. So definitely check that out. And give me the last question again. What was the last question?
Oh, that's coming. That's coming. It's
Okay. Yeah. The big yellow book is yeah, the habit one, just because it's about, it's about the mindset that we need to have and kind of breaking free from breaking free of negative mindsets for sure.
it's a great book, one that I've enjoyed myself, and we'll probably revisit sometime soon too. And it's a book that, if I remember rightly, James Clear was saying he feels that Atomic Habits, his book,
Right.
builds on the work from Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habits. So yeah,
For sure.
great books, great recommendation. I love it. The closing question, then, the one final thing: if there's one thing that you want people to take away or remember from this chat more than anything else, what would it be?
I want to also speaking, this is called Speaking of Influence, and you all have, have gotten to know me a little bit over this podcast. And I think the one thing I would say is with presentations is have fun with them. I think that's one of the biggest things. I've done presentations in multiple different arenas for groups, a little bit more of a, some more groups that have a lot of fun, other groups that are a bit more, you know, a little more straight edge, and you just have to learn to dial down and dial up a little bit. But even with the group I got to dial down with, I'm still trying to smile. I'm still trying to tell stories. Even when I was in an academic perspective where I had to present academic things at academic conferences where it's they're there to learn and listen. I still try to get them to interact. I still try to have fun up there and not be so rote, not be so memorized, not be so robotic. And I think that helps to separate you. I think that helps to separate your message most importantly, because if they remember you, they're going to remember your message. So you just want to make sure you're remembered for because they like you, right? And not because you've gone off the wall there. So when you know your audience, you know when you can push, when you can kind of pull back a little bit. You know what buttons to push. But most of all, I think people, like I said, they want to see a genuine, fun, real person who is good at telling a message. So I think trying to be you and trying to have fun in the process will be really helpful moving forward.
Excellent. That is a great point on which for us to close things off. Jim Van Allen, thank you so much for coming and being my guest on Speaking Influence.
I love the conversation. Thank you to everybody listening. Thank you so much.